Can we stand the excitement of another unboxing of Riley parts? Probably not, but I'll make this quick. So this one here, basically following on from the excitement of all the nuts and bolts last time, this should just be a big box full of washers and spring washers, which it does seem to be. I'm not going to go through all of them here, but basically what I've been wanting to do is build up a stock of all of these kinds of things, because I'm sick of running out of them and trying to have to scrabble through all my random boxes of nuts and bolts and things to try and find a bunch of washers, and especially trying to find a set of washers that are all the same, because I tend to like things all being nice and neat and tidy. So this should hopefully build up my stock of Imperial washers and spring washers and things quite nicely. I have all these parts out because one of my jobs this week is to get everything ready to send to the engine balancer. So I need all the rotating assembly of the engine, so the flywheel and the clutch, not the driven plate, but the crankshaft as well as the rods and pistons and so on, to get all of that balanced nicely. This is the flywheel, which I've had lightened. It always impresses me the quality of the steel in these things. So if I that will ring like a bell like that for a very long time. Very nice quality steel. The way this clutch works is, this is what they call the sliding plate. This was the piece I had to find. Somebody found a good example of one of these for me, because there are different sizes of them, and I had the incorrect size, which is only off by about 1/4 of an inch in height, but that's enough to obviously stop the clutch working. The clutch also has these little bearings in here. I've got tape on them. They're meant to be captive, the little balls, but they tend to sort of come loose. So I've got tape on there at the moment. The way this works is, open up my box of parts. These are the clutch springs. So there's 8 of those that fit in there. And then this is the cover plate, and it has those little wells which line up with those bearings. This is going to be a little tricky, but it basically sits in there, and the springs are obviously held by these cups. I now need to compress this whole thing, and then I can put some of the screws in. I'll do that, and I'll show you how the release bearing works. So this is the cover plate in place. It's not tightened all the way down at the moment. There's marks on here, DC, which I'm guessing stands for dead center. There's a similar mark on the edge of the flywheel here. These two don't line up. Apparently that's normal. But going by the flywheel, that is indeed the dead center point, because you can tell, because the flywheel is keyed onto the crankshaft, so it only fits one way around. The way this clutch works is, normally this plate, which attaches to the input shaft on the gearbox, is obviously between the flywheel and the sliding plate, and that's what the drive gets taken up on this plate here. This sliding plate, this is where the release cup fits in, so that fits on there. And then there's this special, very expensive bearing. This is the lower race of it, which needs to get pressed into that cup. And then there's this sort of flat ball race, kind of like a thrust washer thing, which goes in there, if I don't get it crooked. And then this is the top brace of the bearing, which goes in there. And then there's this big special nut which gets screwed on there. And there's actually a little locking screw that goes through. There's a hole in the side, and it locks that into place. And the way this works is, obviously that's free to rotate on that bearing. I believe there should be a little bit of clearance there. I don't think that bearing should be spinning the whole time. I'll have to look that up. But when you operate the clutch pedal, which is entirely manual, there's no hydraulics or anything involved in this. The clutch pedal operates some forks inside the bell housing that pull this, and that's what's pulling up against the springs to release the clutch. So that's all good and pretty much ready to go. That can all go to the engine balancers. I've also been cleaning up the crank, and one thing I've noticed that's a bit concerning is it looks like there is a crack there. I don't know that you're going to be able to see it, but running along here there's a little line, and it looks like a crack. It's really hard for me to tell. I've tried sort of polishing it out, just with a little brass brush on the Dremel, and that made it a little less obvious. I'm wondering if it's not a crack, it may be a line where this engine had been sitting for so long in one position where it's sort of a line of corrosion, maybe where there's some oil. I don't really know, but let's see. Does this make it any... No, I don't think you'll be able to see it on camera, but there's a very obvious line that goes all the way around here, about halfway round. So if that is indeed a crack, it means this crank is scrap. I'd have to get a new one, which is all doable, but it's just not cheap. So I think from the Riley spares in the UK, a new crank is about £1,700. Whenever I mention anything in pounds, it's for New Zealand dollars, it's about double. So that's quite a few $1,000s. Plus, of course, the shipping, which isn't cheap because these are heavy, and I'd probably have to pay import tax on that when it comes in as well. When you pay the tax here, if you're paying GST on top of a part, you pay GST on top of the part and the postage, which that never really seems fair to me, but that's how they do it. So yeah, having to replace this will be very expensive. So I have got my crack testing kit here, so I'm going to try that and see if that actually shows if it's a crack or not. This is the crank after I've used the crack testing kit on it. I'm just using one of these Rocol 3-part kits. There's a cleaning solution, which is probably just like brake clean or carb type clean stuff. There's this red dye spray, which you have to be careful of because it goes everywhere. You can probably see the splatters of red everywhere. And then there's a developer. And what you do is you clean the part. You have to do that carefully. You don't want the cleaner going into the cracks. So you kind of just wipe off the part on the surface. Then you spray it with the red dye, which, as I say, goes everywhere. And you leave that for 10 minutes, it says on the instructions. And that seeps into any cracks that are there. Then you wipe the surface off again with some water or some cleaner to get rid of the surface dye. And then you spray on this, they call it a developer spray. I don't think it's really any sort of developer like a photo developer. I think it's just effectively white particles that get sprayed on, and that coats the surface. You can see how it's all white there. And then the idea is any cracks will still have dye in them, and this developer stuff will suck the dye out, and you'll see the cracks as a sort of red line on the part. And I don't see that. which is strange. So basically, I'm not really any wiser. This test is showing that it's not cracked. It looks like a crack. It may just be where this engine had been sitting for so long that there was some corrosion there, and it was like a line of corrosion on it. That may be wishful thinking. I'm going to take all the stuff to the engine balancers anyway, and they do engine rebuilding, so they do crack testing. So I'll get them to have a look at it and see what they think. And going through and sorting out my box of parts to take to the engine balancer, I realized I was missing another bit. So this is the crankshaft, that's the flywheel end. I've obviously got all of that, but I was missing the gear at this end. So I had to go rummaging through my boxes of parts, and I did discover I've got two of those main crank gears. A bit of surface rust, which I'm cleaning off now with a bit of evaporust, sticky stuff, which works really well. It's this gel rust remover. I had some of the liquid stuff, which is also really good, but I've run out of that. But in looking for the main crank gear, I realized I also need the intermediate gear. I don't need that to be balanced, but I'm going to need one anyway. So this is the front of the block. The crank comes out of here. There's a cover with a bearing in it. The camshafts go in here. So it's twin camshaft, not quite overhead cam. It's sort of in the middle cam. Each camshaft has a gear on it, and the crankshaft has a gear on it, that little one I just pointed out. And then there's a gear in the middle here called an intermediate gear, which looks something like this. It has these eccentrics on it, which actually drive the oil pump. The oil pump bolts on here, and it's got two plungers that these eccentrics run. I have a big pile of these. Hopefully I've actually got two that are correct. But they run off here and make the oil pump work. The problem is I've got two of these intermediate gears. This one is missing the inner piece by the looks of it. So it looks like this piece here is separate. It must be pushed in, because you can see that eccentric won't come off. It's sort of held on here. So this has to be two parts. The problem is the centerpiece on here is too small. That doesn't fit. This gear, it's a little bit rusty. Same with this one. This one's actually not too bad. I think this one will clean up okay, if I can get the correct bit that goes in the middle, if this is the correct intermediate gear. So this is the gear that takes the drive from the crankshaft to the camshafts. So that's another problem. Like I say, I don't need these to be balanced. I'm imagining they're balanced anyway. And hopefully I've got enough of these. I do have an oil pump as well. I'm not sure what I'm going to do about this center section. I've been through all my boxes of parts and I definitely don't have one. When I was going through my box of parts, I came across some other things. This is another problem. This is way in the future, but it's another issue I'm going to have to sort out, which is the rear axle and the differential. So I have two of them here. I have no idea what this one's from, but this isn't correct for the Riley 9 as far as I can tell. It's got the wrong sorts of bearings. It's too big, it's too wide. I'm not sure what this would have come off. So that's not correct. This one I think is correct. I checked it against the rear axle, the torque tube rather, and this does seem to match the bearings that go into there, and the spacing is correct. So I think this is the right differential. The problem with this one is, if we can see in there, you can see one of the spider gears there is missing a huge chunk off the end of it. You can see that's broken. So I would need to get another set of spider gears for this at least. I'm probably going to get a new crown wheel and pinion anyway to get the correct ratio for the Brooklands. So I can definitely get those. this is how the pinion part works. Again, I've got two different sorts, so I'm not sure exactly which is correct. You can see these are different heights. I'm not sure what this is in here. And this is the pinion part, which goes into the end of the torque tube. The lucky thing is I do have a good muff coupling, which is what this bit's called. So this is kind of a coupling which is just splined. It's like a tube with a spline on the inside. And this is what joins the pinion gear to the drive shaft. I'm pretty sure I've got a good drive shaft inside one of my old torque tubes. I have a good torque tube that's sitting in my molasses tank at the moment, derusting. I really need to take that out. It's got paint on it. I need to wire brush the paint off so the molasses can get to the actual torque tube. And because that torque tube is off a saloon car, torque tube obviously goes from the back of the gearbox under there across to the rear axle, and it's going to be too long, so I'm going to need to have that shortened. But that's not actually a big deal. I've got someone who can do that for me. So, like I say, this is all in the future. I was pretty sure I was going to have to get a new crown wheel and pinion. I worked out this is I think this one was 8 teeth, and this here is, I think the ratio worked out to be 6 to 1. So I think a Brooklands one is 5 point something to 1. I've got it written down somewhere. So future problems to solve. The bigger problem is probably going to be this intermediate gear. I'm not sure if I can get that new. I'll have to have a look and see if that's available. The one other small job I've done that's actually been reasonably successful is I've been repairing the steering wheel. So this was pretty clean. It was just the metal was a little bit thin in a few places where it had kind of rusted through. There was a bit of pitting on it. So that had all been treated in, I had it in a phosphoric acid bath, which took care of all the rust, cleaned it out. I gave it a really, really good rinse, get all the acid off it. I've built up on the outside where there was pitting or any holes, just with JB Weld, which is just steel-based epoxy. And the steering wheel had various holes in it already, proper holes from manufacture, not through rust. And I mixed up some, it was basically 5-minute epoxy, and using a syringe squirted as much of that as I could inside the rim, and then sort of rotated it around and sloshed it about. The epoxy wasn't as runny as I would have liked. I would have liked something a bit more watery, but it seemed to work. I especially wanted to make sure where the spokes are is nice and solid, and that should have sealed the inside of that wheel now, because this is hollow. And once all the epoxy's dry, I'll sand it all smooth on the outside. I'll probably squirt some sort of rust killer, rust preventative onto the inside, and then I'll have a go at string wrapping the wheel. I've got various different strings there. That's what I did on my Austin, and that worked reasonably well. I'll probably just leave the steel or just paint it sort of matte black. I'm not sure. But once again, it's sort of several steps forward and then a few steps back, or finding something else that's holding me up or preventing me moving forwards again. So I'll try and sort all that out. But I think I've had enough of the Riley for today. So apart from cleaning up these gears, because I need these to go to the engine balancer, I'm going to get back onto working on my poor little Austin 7 here, which is so close to being finished. It just needs me to put some time in on it. So this was my mock-up of one of the brackets to hold the front wing on. So I made up just simple templates from aluminium because it was easy to bend, and I'm going to make those out of steel next.